All right. Hey, Joy, are you there?
I'm here.
All right. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
No problem. I'm just looking at the questions, and someone asked about reparations and if I had a
Right. Yeah,
PayPal account.
they can all hear you right now. So we will we
That was
will
hilarious.
we're gonna I'm gonna let you hit on all those. Don't you worry. There's some good ones in there. So um I just want to kind of introduce Joy. I'm gonna let Joy run with this one. Joy is a political strategist, president of the Brooklyn NAACP branch, creator and host of Sunday Civics. And also, what I'm going to be doing here is linking not only her Twitter, but as well her website, and that is going to be in the AMA chat. So please, guys, check out the Twitter website. Joy's got a ton of great information to share, and her Twitter is always active. So, Joy, without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to you to kind of give us a little bit of background about yourself, what you do, where you want to go, where you started, how you got here today, and then we'll jump into the first question. So, Joy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And you guys, I won't talk long about my whole story and background, just so that we can have more time to get to your questions and get to the discussion. Um, I grew up here in New York. I'm actually in Brooklyn right now, but grew up in New York City primarily, although I did go to high school in California, and then came back to New York and went to college in Long Island. My dream my whole life was to be a fashion designer. And then I got a political bug when I was young as well. So then I wanted to be the first senator slash fashion designer. And so when I applied to college, that was my track. That was my job track for majority of my youth. When I got to apply to colleges, could only apply to one, because that's how much money I had, and I didn't know that you could actually get discounts or grants or whatever to apply to more colleges. And I applied to FIT, and didn't get in, and so decided to do my backup of politics, and then got accepted, matter of factly, early to Hofstra University, where I studied political science and Africana studies. So I've always been engaged in politics and action and social justice work. Even in high school, I was raised primarily by my grandmother and then later my mother, and a host of a huge family, with my mom and my stepfather and their family, and my father and our huge family that's originally from the South. And they have a history. We are church folks, and most of my family members are pastors of churches or are professional, famous gospel singers. And then the rest of us either teach or work in social justice in some way. And so we've always had a great sense of self. We had a mission that we are supposed to help others and help improve the society in which we live in. And I do that in a number of ways now, serving as president of Brooklyn NAACP, and we could talk more about that. I've worked on political campaigns and worked in municipal and national politics and government, everything from doing campaigns to working in government at City Hall here in New York City, as well as the Comptroller's Office, and then traveling around the country on campaign. And I am a political strategist. So I consult with candidates, campaigns, and organizations on political engagement. I host a podcast that teaches civic education, which I'm really passionate about, called Sunday Civics. It's a podcast where you can listen to it on anywhere you get your podcasts, and it actually just premiered on Sirius XM satellite radio this past week. And running the NAACP. So those are all of the things that I do. That's sort of a my history in a nutshell, and want to get right into the conversation and the questions.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it, Joy. The first question comes from Subs, and the question is, what are the primary goals of your branch in the near future?
That's a great question. And, I'll start off by saying it's great that you said branch, because a lot of people don't understand the structure of the NAACP. So I'll start that way. And start also with the vision and the mission of the organization. So the vision of NAACP is to ensure that we have a society where all individuals have equal rights without race-based discrimination. Our main mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights of all persons, and to eliminate race-based discrimination. Now, how we do that in terms of the structure of the organization, there's the national NAACP that has a very, 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 very small staff, and then also is managed, is oversaw, I guess, by a national board, and there's 64 members on the board. And the board is so large because we also are mandated in our constitution to have also a balance of generation. So there are also young people in college and our youth divisions that are also on the national board. Under the national organization, all of the states then have what are called state conferences. So I actually belong to the New York State Conference. And then underneath the state conferences are the local branches. And that's where I'm a president of a local branch. So even though we're all part of this national organization and this national entity, the individual branches are managed by regular, community folks, and that come together to address local issues. And that also will then can come together to work on national issues, may it be a Voting Rights Act or a budget or anything like that. That's when our national organization sort of takes the lead on that. So the idea that way is to have people and groups on the ground who can address, those small local issues. You hear the phrase all the time that all politics are local. And people experience politics, they experience justice or a lack of faith in government or our institutions on a local level, most of the time first, not taking into account what people may be experiencing now from national politics. And so the idea is to have people on the ground to address issues that may come up in your local community, your local state, in that way. Our goal is to take the mission of the organization, our national mission, which is based upon our Constitution, to ensure political, educational, social, and economic equality, and apply that locally. So that means also in the organization, we're not a social club. We're not a social service organization. While we certainly do events and activities to encourage people to participate, we, give out certain resources and things that we have, to help build goodwill in the community and build the name of the organization. Our primary focus is to look at those structural barriers and policies that exist locally and in our state, to change or reform them so that there is equity in how people experience. So that's hard job, right? So the or state conference suing policies of company or organization or things like that. Challenge reform their we do.
All right, great. I think you might be lagging just a little bit. If you move your computer over just a little bit, it might. I think your maybe internet might have been just lagging there just a little bit there at the end. Oh no, you're good. I can hear perfect now. sometimes a little turn of the computer makes, a big difference or whatever. I know, because sometimes we get horrible internet. So, next question. Oh
There
no,
was
wait, keep going there. You might have had it a little bit there more.
I know there's been some internet outages, and so if I have to switch to my phone, I can.
No, you're good. That sounded perfect.
Okay, great.
So next question is from NZL. And the question is, Joy, as a non-American, my question would be, do you think affirmative action has worked in the past, and do you think it is working now?
So yeah, that's most people have a basic understanding of what affirmative action is. And let me say at the outset that, affirmative action isn't just a program for or a program that African Americans and Latinos. People seem to think that it's a program that does that, and actually, statistically, white women actually benefit more from affirmative action programs than people of color. So the affirmative action that because the way individual institutions or government or state entities actually enact affirmative action programs. And really the
Hey Joy, your robot. Hey Joy, your mic. Can you hear me, Joy? Hey Joy, can you hear me? Hey, hey Joy, are you there? Can you hear me, Joy? I think your internet may be having some issues. Hey Joy. I think we may be having some technical difficulties. Give it 1 second here. I think Joy may be jumping on another on different. Yeah, she's gonna switch to her phone. So we get 2 seconds there. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm in the mood. I've got a cinnamon apple candle lit right now, and tomorrow I'm going to be burning the. Hold on, wait for it. I'm going to be burning the Christmas tree pine scented candle. So, pretty excited about that. Is this like the worst halftime show ever? All right. I think Joy's going to be jumping back on here in a second. No, Zach, the order was not randomized. Although I am going to jump around sometimes. There is one question from someone named Zach who I'm probably going to skip.
Is this better?
Just kidding, Zach. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Hey, no problem. It happens. It's not a big deal at all. I know the internet. Now we got net neutrality. Before we know it, we won't even be able to do this.
So right? Yeah, I turned the Wi-Fi off on my phone too. So I'm just on my phone service. So hopefully this is clear enough.
Oh, it's perfect. So
okay.
If you want to restart that one, it's about the affirmative action, and that'd be great.
Sure. So the question I think was about affirmative action. And one, there are a lot of misconceptions about affirmative action and what it's supposed to do, right? And particularly that it's only one of the first misconceptions. People think that it's only for people of color, it's only for Black or Latino folks. And actually, statistically, white women actually benefit more from affirmative action programs in this case in the past couple of years, past decades, I should say. And the reason why you see affirmative action challenged a lot in courts and in public debate is particularly how institutions implement them. So affirmative actions is a policy, and then it's up to the institutions, be it a government entity or a college or your job or anything like that, to actually implement that policy. So they design ways. So some colleges may design their acceptance program, and they design their program in a way that meets the requirements of the policy and helps them get the balance of what they're looking for. And then people challenge that, right? There have been a number of cases in the last 2 decades specific to colleges about how they've actually designed their acceptance program. And we have affirmative action policies for city governments and for the federal government. In fact, it was actually government contracts when President Johnson actually created the first, JFK created the program, and then Johnson continued it in I think 67 or something like that. And so it's the way that the policies are enacted that sometimes can have people upset, particularly because they think it's quotas where we're going to accept 5 Black people over, these other 5 white people. And so people have misconceptions about what affirmative action is. I think it has, in the past couple of decades, actually, particularly on government contracts and college admission, helped not only people of color, but also women to gain a more equitable standing in our society.
All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Next question is Joy. Does the NAACP support the Black Lives Matter movement, considering both Hillary and Bernie Sanders condemned them during the 2016 election?
So it really doesn't matter that presidential candidates may or may not have dismissed Black Lives Matter organization or individuals in that instance. NAACP is a nonpartisan organization. We don't take things based upon a particular political party or political candidate. I will say that NAACP does support the mission and goals of Black Lives Matter, the organization, and the overall movement, which is similar to what our vision and mission is to make sure that we have an equitable society for people of color in this country. So we do, and our individual branches, as well as the national organization, have supported BLM chapters or individual organizers in a lot of different various capacities.
Okay, great. So I have to rebuttal you there on that one.
Okay.
If you look at the NAACP spending as far as campaign donations and lobbying, they are very almost, 100% Democratic, and support the Democratic Party. You mentioned that they don't lean a certain way, they don't really affiliate with that. Then why are they donating to nothing but Democrats?
Wait, you're talking about so the NAACP as an institution cannot donate to candidates?
Lobbying expenditures, so they can actually spend money towards things like human rights, correct?
Yes, but so we also are, up until a couple of and I don't think the actual change has happened yet. The NAACP as an institution is a 501c3 and a 501c4 organization. So 501c3, in that we don't give money directly to candidates or, any institution at that. We
No,
do
that would be
advocate.
a maximum amount that you could possibly give anyway.
So
But
you may be mentioning of individual members, right, giving money to candidates or whatever, who may also, so for instance, me, right? So in addition to me being president of Brooklyn NAACP, yeah, I also give money to candidates. I am also personally a Democrat. So majority of the money that I personally give would go to Democrats. That's separate from, I don't take NAACP money and give it to Democratic candidates. What we do spend money on in terms of the lobbying dollars that you're talking about is we actually do, as part of our mission, to lobby Congress to, on the issues that we're addressing.
right. But at the same rate, I mean, as far as just anybody would take it, I mean, it's pretty common sense as far as how lobbying works, because I'm involved in it myself. So I can, if you don't know, I can tell you this is how it works. So when you have certain people that donate, like the people who do for the NAACP and the lobbying parties, if you think that that money isn't for a particular, do you not think that money goes to a particular party or to a particular person from a party that has a certain stance, or do you believe that this money is truly just spread throughout everybody happily?
No, so I'm confused as to your question in terms of what money the NAACP has to give money to people, because we don't give money to people. We spend money on
Lobbying effort.
projects in
Right.
organizations and stuff. So we don't actually give money to people.
Well, money's not directly given, no. And maybe
So when you're talking about the lobbying efforts, are you talking about like when we do the report cards on the legislators and what issues they stand on and the money we spend on that? Or are you
right.
talking about when we do like the marches and things like that and we spend money? Because the way that the taxing it, like, we don't, in terms of us spending money on lobbying activities, it's designated as lobbying activities because we are advocating for or against particular legislation, and we can only do that for a certain amount of points a year.
No, absolutely. And I guess my question is, do you not do you think that they really don't like support, and that's my rebuttal. Do you not think that they actually support a certain party over the other one?
That the NAACP supports a party over another one?
Correct. Do you think
I
so?
think
I guess, do you think so? Let me ask you this. I'll ask you the flip side. Do you think that the NAACP 100% supports the Republican Party more than the Democratic Party?
no.
There you go.
But that has also changed over time, because when African Americans were primarily Republicans, majority of the support in organizations that we worked with were Republican organizations, because majority of the people that we served, back when African Americans were primarily Republicans, were Republicans, right? So we go where the people are.
Right. But
So
that was
people
the
who
60s.
support,
That was the
right,
60s.
the 15 and 60, right? So we go where our people are, right? So if there are people who support right now, if there are Republican legislators, there are Republican folks who are actually presidents of NAACP branches, right? And so wherever they are is people who actually come to the organization to be a part of it. So if you have policies or you're supporting issues and things that align with our mission and our organization, then yes, we're going to be supportive of you. And right now it tends to lean liberal or democratic in terms of a party structure, and before then it leaned conservative or Republican, because that's where people were.
No, great answer. Thank you. All right, next question comes from Blackhawk, and it is: do you think there has been an uptick in hate crimes or in hate crime reporting in recent years?
Yeah, I would tend to think that it's probably more of a hate crime reporting and people feeling more comfortable and secure in actually reporting hate crimes. I haven't seen any recent data, at least here in New York City. I can say that the numbers have been an increase of reports. That's not to say that more hate crimes aren't happening. because it's hard to gauge that, right? So you would think that there would be more hate crimes in, say, the 30s or the 50s or the 60s or whatever like that. And so comparing that data when you didn't have people reporting it as often versus now where people, don't have the fear of being hung or the police coming and like, trashing your house or the KKK coming through or something like that. So you're more emboldened and more secure in actually reporting it. So I think I would lean personally that there may be an increase in the reports, but I haven't seen full data to know that by fact.
No, thank you. All right, next question is from Zach. It's kind of a bit of a. I'll read it and you kind of tell me what you think here. It is, how do you justify the existence of affirmative action considering the perceived benefit that blacks get is 230 points on the SAT and 185 for Hispanics, while Asians get dinked about 50, according to Princeton University study? Is it not racist in a way and very unfair? Does it not cause the high black dropout rates of universities?
Yeah. So I actually think this is a good question, and I'm actually doing an episode soon on affirmative action, particularly. I can't say that I know the detail enough about it to respond to that in detail. That would be, a answer to your question in that aspect. But it is a good question, and hopefully, I don't know who the person to name it asked that, but I'm actually going to take your question and ask that with the expert I'm speaking with in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that was Zach. So great. Zach also tuned into that. So, is that the Sunday? Which show is that again?
That's Sunday Civics. Yeah.
Okay, that's Sunday Civics, and guys, that's on our Twitter. So Zach and everybody else that's wondering about that one, that will be asked.
And Zach, if you can actually message me or anything, like I'll make mention of you and everything that this question is from you. So that'd be great.
All right, perfect. So next question comes from Broken Hearted Liberal. And the question is, considering the reaction to hashtag it's okay to be white, do you deny that reverse racism is real?
Yes, reverse racism isn't real because racism has a clear definition. It doesn't need to be the reverse of reverse racism is not racism. So racism is prejudice or discrimination with power directed at people of a different race, right? But based specifically on the fact that you believe you're superior than that person, right? And that you actually have the power to execute on that. So there's no need for a reverse, right? If you're saying reverse, you're assuming that racism is only targeted toward one particular group or one particular entity. And that's not the case. There's a clear definition of what racism is, so it doesn't need to be reversed, right? And, to be very clear, there's a difference between racism, there's a difference between prejudice. The power dynamic is what's important when discussing the differences in terms of someone having prejudice or being racist and acting on those things, right? So we all hold some kind of bias or prejudice based upon our life experiences. When it rises to a level of being racist, is that you actually have you believe that you are actually superior than the other entity or the other group, and you have the power to actually execute power over that group or that entity, right? So you could just one of the misconceptions people think of NAACP or our work in general is that we want to change the hearts of bigots and people who view me maybe as less than because I'm an African American woman. That's not my role. Like, I'm not trying to win you over. I'm not trying to win a seat at your Thanksgiving table. That's not what I'm trying to do. Like, my work is to make sure that if you are in a position of power, be it that are the boss at a company, or you're an elected official and wielding contracts, or things like that, that you are not then executing your racist ideas or prejudice ideas and then using your power to discriminate against me. So I'm not trying to, be friendly and nice with people and change people's individual hearts about, how they view particular races or people of color. Like our goal is to make sure that if you're in a position of power, that you're not using those things to discriminate or restrict any access to resources or anything to those particular groups. In this group being people of color. So reverse racism doesn't exist because racism exists purely in its definition.
Thank you. A great answer. Next question is from Zane, and it is another affirmative action one. Do you believe that affirmative action places enough emphasis on social class as opposed to race? And what do you think is the right balance?
Yeah, so that's a good question in terms of, because a lot of things, and there were some other questions in here too about the intersection of race and class, and there's huge overlap in intersection of race and class in our society, and so effective affirmative action programs not only deal with strictly race, but they should also deal with income. They should also deal with other things that are barriers to people having equitable opportunities, right? And so you could have, somebody from a white person from Appalachia and a Black person, from Detroit, who, both promising, folks. And then you have a legacy person where their dad and their granddad has gone to this school, and they don't necessarily have the grades, right? Effective affirmative action program should be able to give both that white person from Appalachia and that Black person from Detroit the opportunity to have access to the education because they have, the grades, the initiative, and desire the opportunity, right? Both of them desire that. And it could be based upon race, it could be based upon income, right? So a good balance is thinking about all of those things, about equitable opportunities.
All right, great. Next question comes from Valency, and the question is, for the NAACP to help one race to have an equal opportunity, would this be considered, in a sense, racist?
No. So the reason why the NAACP exists, think about when the NAACP was founded and what its purpose is, right? So the NAACP is founded over 100 years ago at a time specifically when African Americans in this country are being targeted and being denied equal access and their full rights of citizenship. Right. So the reason why we have these, when we talk about people of color or other marginalized groups, right, think about the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment was put into place, particularly because African Americans after Reconstruction were being targeted and weren't states themselves, states were implementing what were called Black codes or particular laws on the books to prevent African Americans from being full citizens in this country. And so the reason why the 14th Amendment was put into place was to assert the fact that African Americans are full citizens in this country, and to ensure, to not only define that they are citizens, but also to ensure that there are protections that states and other institutions, particularly states, it names specifically, don't put laws into place that directly affect the citizenship or decline the citizenship of African Americans in this country. And so the organization is an extension of that. Right, is saying that we are consistently on watch to ensure that states, governments, institutions, whatever, do not have policies or laws in place that consistently deny African Americans their equal protection under the laws of this country.
Great answer. Next question comes from, and I don't know if you know this person, but I don't, but maybe you do. NZL's question is, what do you think about Rachel and Dolezal controversy?
For those who may not know, I hate answering this question, but I will. Rachel Dolezal was a person who was head of a NAACP branch. Was it? I don't remember if it was like Utah or Connecticut or some other state. I know that was not New York. And apparently she is I self-identifies as a Black woman, although she is a woman of European descent. And so first I should say, because I saw another question about other people, do you have to be, Black or African American to be in the NAACP? And the answer is no. We actually have a number of presidents who are not African American. So the issue for us wasn't specifically that she wasn't Black. It was the deception and of herself, and also falsely reporting hate crimes, and is the reason that we took issue as an organization with her leadership. So for me, that is what was important. I think falsely reporting hate crimes is atrocious. It diminishes in the public eye the victims of real hate crimes and brutality. And then second, there's no need to be deceptive about who you are, because you don't need to be Black to be in the NAACP, and you don't need to be Black to be president of the NAACP. So it's an unfortunate situation.
I remember it now. Thank you. That was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago, and people still ask me about it, unfortunately.
Right. All right. So, kind of not a question, but I figured maybe you can kind of go into that. I mean, what's your take on, the recent, events? I mean, the police brutality that you see. Now we've got cameras. The cameras are off. There was the recent one, I forget where it was, where she was on Facebook Live and her boyfriend or significant other was shot live on Facebook. I mean, do you believe that police departments around the country and state, city, local jurisdictions are making an actual effort to change this, or is it all front?
Wait, say that last part again.
Are they actually making these changes, these cameras, the body cams, and other controls that they have in place to try to stop police brutality, in particular against African Americans? Do you believe these efforts are actually happening? So in other words, somehow the camera turned off, so on and so forth, right? Or do you think it's just a front that is saying, hey, yeah, we bought the cameras for people's things, and yeah, we're going to make sure this happens, and yeah, we're going to hire 2 more Black guys for the police force, so on and so forth? I mean, or do you think there's actual changes being made?
That's a very big and broad question, particularly because police departments are not centralized, right? So police departments are local. The power that police have actually comes from the states. Police departments are not in the Constitution. They're not federally controlled. And it's primarily set by the states, and how they're governed and managed is also locally and by the state. Do I have any? I think that the percentage of the brutality and the individual police officers that commit these actions is a smaller subset of the larger departments, right? So I have a number of family members, my grandfather and others, who are police officers. And so primarily, I believe everybody gets up every day and this is what they get to do. They are serving their community, and, majority of them are not getting up and deciding, how many, Black people can I can I brutalize today? I don't think that's what most of the officers do. In terms of reform, this is the instance when we're talking about changing policies and changing legislation and instituting a legislation that addresses the disparity in how certain communities are policed or experience policing. And I also think, separate from how people of color encounter and experience policing in their communities, I also think there's a concurrent conversation on policing in general in our country, and how this institution, how we probably definitely need to reform how it's done in our current society. One basic thing is I think we ask police officers to do too much. Right? We're asking them to make peace, keep laws. If someone has a mental health issue, if your cat is stuck in a tree, if you're we're asking all of these, we're asking, these groups to do, or these officers to do a wide variety of things, some of which they're not specifically trained to do. You could think of, responding to a mental health crisis, right? A police officer, may not be equipped. The majority oftentimes is not equipped to deal with that, particularly in larger urban centers, right? So I think we have to, at the one hand, think about how policing particularly happens in communities of color and put reforms and institutional changes in place that addresses those things. And concurrently, we have to talk about policing in general and how we can reform and expand and change the definition of that, or else we're going to always be in this space that we're in.
Great answer. The next question comes from Revive, and the question is: the California NAACP recently said that the national anthem is racist and must be changed. What are your thoughts on that?
Wait, the what?
The California NAACP said that the national anthem is racist and must be changed.
I didn't hear that. Huh.
Let me see if I can find an article on it.
Yeah, I just Googled it. I see it.
Yeah, so they did say that. It looks like they had mentioned that it all started with sitting down during the national anthem, which no one noticed. So California lawmakers returned to the Capitol in January. The Star Spangled Banner. The organization last week began circulating among legislative offices 2 resolutions that passed as a state conference in October, one urging Congress to rescind one of the most racist, pro-slavery, anti-Black songs in the American lexicon as the national anthem, and another in support of former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who launched a protest movement against police brutality among professional athletes by kneeling when the Star Spangled Banner was played. We owe a lot of it to Kaepernick, the California NAACP president Alice Huffman said. I think all this controversy about the knee will go away once the song is removed.
That's interesting. I didn't hear that they did that. Most people don't know that the Star Spangled Banner has additional verses anyway.
I didn't know.
Yeah, most people think it's just the one standard. There are actually 3 more. It makes a mention of I haven't thought much about that. So I don't have a real answer to it. I mean, there are going to be a number of things, right? And I was asked this. I was on PBS talking about the statues, the Confederate statues, and things of that nature. And there are a lot of things in this country, right, that make mention to our history of slavery. A lot of things that, in now in its context, would be, well, in back in that context too, would be, racist and discriminatory. Um, Changing a national anthem, that's going to be hard for a lot of folks. I don't know. But I don't have an official, like, I'm not adding it to the list of things that Brooklyn NAACP is working on, certainly.
No, absolutely. Thank you. That was that one was a curveball there.
I know, I see. I'm like, I didn't even hear about that. But that just lets you know, like, there are different, like I said, there are, many branches, different organizations, and they can do things. We don't all, know what, we know the top line issues that all of us are working on, but I actually hadn't heard that. That's interesting.
So I'm gonna next question is, I'm gonna kind of, you mentioned it earlier, and I'll just get to Demeter's question, and maybe you can answer it quick. I think you mentioned it. Isn't affirmative action most beneficial for white women?
Oh yeah, we answered that, right?
Yeah. Do you have any more on that? Or do you want to hit on that at all?
Nope.
Kind of
yeah.
Okay. Next question is,
and that's a statistical standpoint. The same thing with public assistance programs, right? So people believe that public assistance, either be a WIC or food stamps, just benefit people of color. I often sometimes have people, when we're talking about a reparations thing or whatever, and they say, like, food stamps, and it's like, food stamps isn't just for Black people, but okay. So, yeah, I think that's a simple base.
All right. So next question is, do you think cultural appropriation is a serious issue? What about whitewashing in media?
That's I don't say a hard one, but it's a difficult one to respond to, because, and I have a different view than maybe some people may have, some other people of color may have on social media and others, because what culture is, what we all experience, right? And that can be, your culture can be influenced, obviously, by your heritage, and by your race. It can be influenced by your proximity to other groups and things of that nature, and it's fluid. So there are things that may be part of, for instance, where I grew up in Queens, we had there's a large Italian population where I grew up in Queens. And certainly because you had Caribbean African Americans from the South, and Italian people and Jewish people sort of living in a particular area, our cultures are going to overlap and intersect with each other. Now, this is before social media, right? So this is back in the 80s. Right. So culture moves and changes, and people experience it based upon their proximity. And it's also defined by certain events or activities, right? So hip hop is not only a form of music, but it's also a culture, right? There's a certain culture in terms of dress, in terms of speech, in terms of all these things like that are attributed to hip hop. Now, it's primarily people of color who created and drove hip hop, but now it's a culture that is experienced by millions of people across the world. There's hip hop culture in Japan. There's hip hop culture in China. So so culture is very fluid in that way, and depending on your proximity to different cultures, you interchange and interweave all the time. Now, what happens now is, because our culture has people's cultures overall, you're exposed to more, because that proximity now not only exists in terms of somebody living next door to you, but now because you're experiencing social media or experiencing media in general, so you see more, and and so you can borrow and take differently. I think the problem that people can run into is not acknowledging how they're basically what we call Columbusing. Like, they discovered this, and before this, this didn't exist at all. right? And so it's like someone saying, I started braiding my hair this way, or I created this new product to brush your baby hairs, and it's just like people have been doing that for whatever. So I think that's when people feel some kind of way about it, in that is there's no acknowledgement to the creation, or that it existed before, but instead people are Columbusing and saying that I invented this, or this is the new way to do anything. And I think that's where people kind of get hung up.
No, thank you. Yeah, totally agree. All right, next question is, does the NAACP have a worry about the rampant homophobia occurring in communities of color? Are you there, Joy?
Yeah, say the question again.
Sorry. I don't know why anything got muted there. Sorry. Does the NAACP have a worry about the rampant homophobia that is occurring in communities of color?
Yeah, so as individuals, we have issue with anything that um affects marginalized groups or marginalized people. And certainly I can speak for the Brooklyn branch, in that we have particularly sought out ways to be more inclusive, or sort of understand what issues that exist that we can lend our voice and our name to help prevent discrimination and targeting in that way. And that's in going on and be a good partner on that issue, particularly as it pertains to people in the LGBT community, who are also people of color. I think the national organization also has a task force on addressing these issues. It's not to the level that I'm comfortable with, or even that we should be. I think we need to do a better job at that. But again, our role is not to try to change people's hearts and minds. It's really to address any policies or institutional things that exist, um, or or things that put up barriers for people of color, or in this case marginalized people, including LGBTQ community, from having equitable and equal standing as citizens in the country.
Great answer. Thank you. Next question comes from Doobie, and the question is, do you think the rise of white identitarian groups like the alt-right has anything to do with casual racism toward white people being tolerated by the media, i.e., Simone Sanders, former aide to Bernie Sanders, saying that we don't need white people running the DNC on CNN and facing no pushback from the other guests and anchor?
So I don't remember seeing or hearing anything about Simone specifically saying we don't need white people doing that. There is I'm concerned about the rise of sort of the white identity groups, particularly because remember, back when I talked about the definition of racism and people believing that they are superior, and then being able to execute on those prejudice ideas, or discriminate based upon those prejudice ideas. And so I'm concerned in that fact, in that it making it okay for people to feel that it's okay for me to have these views, and it's okay for me to identify and amass power with other people who feel this way, and to exert our superiority with this group. Like ours, feel that this society is equitable, and opportunities exist for all people in this country. So I'm concerned in that way. In terms of casual, the phrase, I think, what did you say, casual racism towards whites? I don't believe that exists people of casual racism towards white folks. I don't think that I would need more evidence in terms of that existing because I don't know that that exists. So that would be my response to that.
All right, great. Um, Next question is: would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. be proud of the NAACP, given we have had a black president for 8 years and inner city crimes didn't go down, some are up, and education has only gotten worse?
So I don't purport to say what our past, what our ancestors would think or know, because they wouldn't be able to know in context. The same thing in terms of, people attributing certain thoughts and ideas to founding fathers, right? Particularly because our society, you have to live in our society and know the context in which we are. So I don't say things like Dr. King would be proud or Dr. King would be disappointed. I tend to stay away. I try not to say those things. In terms of the social issues that you are addressing, or that the person who asked the question are addressing in terms of crime and education and things of that nature, I do think that, and I know for a fact that a number of us who also do social justice work address these issues every day. It's not something that we're not aware of. It's not something that we don't work on 24/7. And I'll give you an example in terms of education. Right here in Brooklyn, we have districts and we have particular schools who that are low performing. And the reason why we do the work in terms of trying to change and reform education as an institution on the local level is to address those facts, right? When we're talking about increasing resources for after school programs, or we're talking about increasing resources for job training and development, we're asking for those things and advocating for those things to address issues such as crime, gun violence, and low math, reading, or other scores, right? So the reason why we're advocating for those things is that we know that we need the resources in order for our communities to address those things, and so that's why we're doing them. So I'm always upset about the people inferring that we don't care about those issues when we work on them every day. And those are the reasons why we're advocating for certain changes in those institutions, is to specifically address those issues.
Awesome answer. All right, next question comes from Alice, and it is the divide between Black and white Americans more of an economic or cultural issue? And if so, what is the most effective way of bridging the gap, in your opinion?
The answer to that is all, right? I mean, there are, and I think I said this in an answer previously, that there are things that people have more in common, people of color and other marginalized groups. A lot of issues of class. There are a lot of issues of economic anxiety that are shared across race and ethnicity, right? And what people do is they try to exploit the racial differences, right, and stoke the fear, and basically tell people that the person to blame or the entities to blame are, they may tell white working class folks that, oh well, it's Mexicans or Black folks taking your jobs, right? In order to stoke that fear, instead of the fact that there is an actual economic system overall that is impacting both the white working class, African Americans, and Latinos at the same time. And so instead of addressing that issue, right, and that's actually something that Dr. King was working on later in his life, was sort of bridging that gap of working class African Americans, Latinos, and whites, and addressing the economic issues and the class issues. And instead, people stoke and poke the bear and poke the scab that we have in this country on race, and continue to divide people based upon that. When there's actually a lot of things that are in common, but people have you to believe that you don't have anything in common, that if you're a white male, working class male, that you actually don't have anything in common, within the African American working class person, when nothing could be further from the truth. You're experiencing the same economy, right? You're experiencing the same policies that favor wealthy people, that favor corporations, that put your pension at risk if you have one. Our generation doesn't really, starting with our generation, I'm a Generation Xer, we start to not have pensions or retirement to look forward to, right? So people exploit those issues. And then they have you believe the other thing that people do. This is a political discussion that's going on now, where people say, well, we don't need to focus on social issues or discrimination or reproductive choice or any of those issues. We need to address the real issues of real Americans. That further divides people, right? Because I have economic and class issues in common with a white working class woman. But if I experience policing in a different way, if I'm worried about police brutality, if my schools are substandard, if all of those things, or those social issues that other people call social issues, that those affect my direct life, right? And so to dismiss them as just social issues when they have a direct and real impact on the people who experience them, those are also being dismissive of the human beings and the individuals who are experiencing them. Right. So we, when I think of, social issues, I think about issues like, we need to address why, women aren't getting married. No, we don't. That don't got nothing to do with me. That's none of my business. Right. But I don't consider, police brutality or issues of police reform a social issue that affects the daily lives and the very bodies of people of color in this country. Right. And so there's also a clear definition of what that is, of social issues versus real issues that we need to address and that our government needs to take action on.
Really good answer. Are you familiar with Hotep?
I am familiar with Hotep. I just mentioned this in my show.
so Hotep, as you know, is what was founded in Brooklyn, I believe. Is that right?
Hotep is well, let me go ahead. Go ahead with your question.
So I think it was founded in Brooklyn, but the question obviously is not about the history of Hotep. The question is referring to their recent quote unquote partnership alliance with the alt-right movement. And what is your take on that?
Yeah, I don't understand or pretend to understand or I don't know what is happening. It's like I don't know what's going on. So Hotep is an organization now that has a founding date. That's hilarious to me. So there's a Hotep like organization.
Yeah, so Hotep was actually founded a long time ago. Well, not a long time ago, but it was in Brooklyn, New York.
No, okay. So this is an example of of something being just different in terms of an organization or an entity versus something that has been a part of a phrase that has been part of culture for a very long time. So
well,
I identify
complete idiots. I mean, it's like, hey, we hate black. They're like, hey, we hate black people. They're like, great, so do we. We're black. Where do we sign up?
Yeah, there's a difference. So Hotep is actually has been part of culture and is a phrase part of culture for a very, very, very long time. right?
Right.
And I think it means like, something to be at peace or something like that. And it's
Yeah,
part of, I mean, it has
It's an
roots.
Egyptian word to
Yeah,
be at peace. Yeah.
yeah. But it has roots also in in the culture, and particularly hip hop culture, in being in a form of five percenters, or individual groups that have spun off and been created in a Black community. I think what you're referring to now is there is a new entity that uses the Hotep name. I think it's like Hotep Nation or something like that. And they have like a website and sort of all this other kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's separate. That's separate from the cultural ideal and the cultural phrasing of Hotep. So it's yeah, it's important to have that difference of that explanation of what that is.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah, I think they're a little bit. Um, so the next question is a good one. What social or political writings slash authors have influenced your thoughts and ideas the most? Some examples they gave were Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, etc., etc., etc.
So I am a bibliophile. So I actually have over 400 books in my Brooklyn
Wow.
apartment. And so I collect and read books about African American history, culture, political history and culture, and then also Black theology. So some books, and I'm like in my home office right now, just looking at one of my bookshelves, and I can tell you some of the ones that have been particularly important to me. A good book to pick up is the Harrison reader. Hubert Harrison was a great writer. He African American here in New York. Was not a Democrat. I think he was a socialist. So Hubert Harrison and his writings have been really influential. Manning Marable has been really influential in terms of my reading. Howard Thurman, in terms of where my political ideology and my connection to my faith is. Howard Thurman, who's also a person who influenced Dr. King as well. And so a good book to pick up to start there is Jesus and the Disinherited. Um, who else? Certainly Du Bois, and also Booker T. Washington, Audre Lorde. Yeah, there's a whole. Actually, I have a Goodreads profile, so you can actually see all of the books I own on my Goodreads profile.
Okay, great. Um, Thank you. Yeah, yeah, guys, check out the Goodreads profile. There's some stuff in there. Whoever asked that one. So, next question, little bit tougher. What is one decision either in the past or currently, or maybe one they're going to make? What is one decision that the NAACP has made that you didn't?
That I didn't agree with.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an easy one. Before I joined the organization, or was it like in the early part when I was in the organization? I probably was just like a general member or board member. They did this like burial of the N word like thing where they did like a funeral for the N word, and I was like, what the like what is happening? So that definitely was something where I was like, do I want to be here? What is happening? So that was certainly one decision. And they had the nerve to put like the video on the website and stuff. I was like, oh my God. I was like, that was definitely would go in the record books for me.
Great answer. All right, next question is from Tato. And what groups do you consider to be in competition with the NAACP? And what are your thoughts on Black Lives Matters being integrated by some and dismissed by other NAACP chapters?
Yeah, I don't think of it as a competition. There's no, like, we should, in terms of, there's no, I don't think of it in that kind of frame of we're competing to do social justice work. That makes no sense to me. Yeah. Like that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think of it in that terms. There are other organizations who do similar work that we often partner with, that sometimes we don't partner with. Doesn't matter, but I don't think of it as a competition, and anybody who actually thinks of it as a competition shouldn't be doing the work, in my view, because it's not a race. You're not, doing this work to win awards, or, to win more money than somebody else, or, win a deal better than someone else. That makes no sense in the context of what our mission is. So I don't think of it in that way. And in terms of other organizations, or even other NAACP branches not embracing or working with Black Lives Matter, I think that's unfortunate, right? Because the NAACP has been around for over 100 years, right? And I don't see us particularly going anywhere, unfortunately. I would like for us to be at a place as a country where we didn't need to exist. But I don't think we're there yet, and I don't know that we'll reach it in my lifetime. But we're definitely not there yet. And movements happen over generations, and they change and are framed by the generation that's experiencing them. And so for a millennial generation and for others, Black Lives Matter is a movement that they have particularly experienced or viewed brutality and discrimination in a way that spawned the creation of Black Lives Matter as an organization and as a movement. And that's important. Similar to SNCC existing, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right? That came out of and they were the millennials of that generation, that came out of them experiencing discrimination and experiencing racism in a particular way, and then being unhappy and unsatisfied with how certain organizations, including the Urban League and NAACP at the time, were continuing to fight on that issue. And so that generation created SNCC, right? So movements happen, and there are new ways to address those movements or those issues based upon that specific generation at that time that's coming of age and how they experience it, right? The same thing, and it's not just with social justice movements, or the peace and war movement has experienced that as well. The generation that experienced Vietnam, became politically active and engaged in a way that is different from the generation that experienced, World War II, or even experienced the our first war in the Middle East, right? So that happens based upon generation. If you're thinking of the long-term overall view of our culture and our society in this country.
Thank you. Next question, good question. Comes from Stumptavian, and the question is, Joy, do you think there should be any limitations on free speech, or should free speech of all kinds be protected, even if hateful?
So here's where I did a show on this as well, where we talked about you have freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean you're protected from repercussions of the speech that you freely gave. So in terms of our free speech rights, what it says is that the government cannot limit your speech, right? And that you're protected in that instance. But I can tell you now, you may have the freedom to call me a nigger to my face. That does not protect you. It's not a shield. It's not a cloak. It's not Cap's, shield that's going to protect you from me probably punching you in the face. Or slapping. Like, there are still repercussions for you to experience. And whether or not it's your job, if you say something, that you believe, I said it, I have the freedom of speech, but your job, based upon the contract you signed, says, yeah, you said that freely on your Facebook page or something else, but based upon the contract that you signed or the work agreement that you signed here, that doesn't align with the beliefs of the organization or the company, and so now you're fired. So yes, you had the freedom to say the thing, but it didn't probably protect you from your job saying, we're disconnecting from you based upon that. Right. So yes, you have the freedom, to say what you want, but and that's what people believe. They believe saying freedom of the speech is like a cloak or like a protective shield, that if I say the thing, I'm going to be protected, from any repercussions that may occur because I said the thing. And that's not the case. The freedom is for you to say it. It's not for you to, to protect you from what repercussions you may experience, unless it's the government trying to limit you. And there's a difference between immediate repercussions versus, you may prove to win at a later date. Right. So yes, I have the freedom to stand out, on a corner and, or somebody to stand out on a corner and say racist things. But then if you get arrested, right, you can't use freedom of speech on the forum or something like that. But like people conflate what freedom of speech actually.
All right, thank you. Next question is, here we go. What is your take on Alex Jones, Milo, Ben Shapiro, all these characters that are coming to life on YouTube, TV, everywhere? What is your take on this movement?
I think for, individuals or people, people like that, I think there are sad people with fragile ass feelings, who believe that, and there, I'm not painting the people who may have identified something, one individual thing within something that they're saying, and take wind of that. It could be economic anxiety. It could, maybe be, being suppressed or depressed in, other ways. But these individuals, they know what they're doing. Right. They are specifically stoking, fear or racial animus, in order to build themselves up as individuals. And I take issue with that. I take issue of that, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on, it happens in my own community, in our own culture as well, where people stoke fear and anxiety, and other issues. Gang members do it, gang leaders do it. All these people do these things and are emotionally manipulative, to create these institutions or create this voice for themselves. And it's really just puffing themselves up. And so I always take issue with that, because you're capitalizing on people's fears. You're capitalizing on people seeking something to help them out of where they are, whether it be in a depressed state, economic anxiety, poverty, or father figures or anything like that. So I lump them in the same way, right? The same way I lump a gang leader or somebody who is stoking the or manipulating young people who are looking for father figures or some sense of family, and they're using that to manipulate young people into drugs or into sex abuse or violence and things like that. It's the same vein, right? They're just using it a way to be selfish and self-serving, and I think and some of them also have fragile ass feelings, right? They believe that society has told them, or other people, individuals have told them that they are better than, and that everything should be handed to them, and it's not. You got to work for all the shit we got in this country, every individual, right? And so, for those, I don't tend to think about them a lot. I don't tweet their stuff or follow. There's this thing that people do there where they tweet or post stuff, and they're like, "Look at this racist person being racist." I don't do that. So, I just think we're in a sad state of affairs, and again, if we address the underlying issues, um, of economic anxiety, if we address the issues and sort of not stoke people's fear, and not, poke the scab that is our racial divide in this country, and actually try to heal that, we can get a little bit further. And then there would be no need, because people wouldn't listen to people like them.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, we're going to do two more questions. The next question is from Wolfson. The NAACP has been at the front lines of civil rights activism for decades. In your years of experience, what have been the greatest changes in the work being done? And are there any specific types of issues that have become more or less prominent?
I think for me, in terms of the latter part of the question, in terms of things that have become more prominent for me, is actually trying to teach people and train people on, um, the work that we're trying to do is actually putting laws on the books, or changing, the institutions, or reforming institutions that have historically been discriminatory, either by design or and remember, discrimination doesn't have to just be about intent. It can also be in terms of practice, right? So we didn't start out this policy to discriminate it specifically towards African Americans or Asian Americans. It just ended up that way. We need to reform that too, right? So we're not just talking about things that had the direct intent of discriminating, but discriminate also by that way, in terms of how it actually a policy or legislation plays out. And I think the one thing for me is sort of us going, the branches and the state conferences that are working across the country, and actually working in our communities to actually enact laws or change laws. And that's beneficial for everyone, not just African Americans, right? So when we, advocate for laws or changes of reform, it ultimately improves our overall society, and moves us closer to the democracy that we aspire to be, right? And so when we make those changes, we're actually improving our society overall. And those are the things that are most helpful, and that I look forward to doing, and the changes that I specifically like for us to focus on.
All right, great. All right, so the last question is going to be Joy, where do you see yourself going? Where do you want to go? Do you want to run for senator, for office? What exactly do you want to do?
So right now, I'm just focusing on, two things. One, I just got married, so I'm focusing on that. Two, I'm focusing on being America's civics teacher and teaching people about how our government works, both not only on the national level, but really on the local level, and how you can actually interact with government to improve and reform our democracy. And then looking at ways to identify and train young folks who can take my place. I don't want to be head of the NAACP forever. There are some people who be presidents of NAACP for 30 or 40 years. That is not what I'm looking to do. So I'm looking to train and develop young leaders who can actually continue the work and do it much better and much more efficiently than I can.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Great answers, some tough questions. You have done a great job. And as always, you are welcome back here anytime. If you ever get anything new, you get into some new stuff, or you want to come by and just say, hey, you are always welcome back. Thank you so much, Joy. And before we go, we are going to do an open discussion one level down if you have time. I know it's getting late, so if not, no big deal.
I'll stay for a few minutes.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to drop everybody down into that channel and everybody can talk. So if you could I'll drop you down there.
Okay.